proverbial is happening as usual. And here we go. So, my thesis was based on being and becoming a primary school principal in Ireland. I'll speak about a view from the inside later. I submitted it in April 24 and didn't graduate until June 25. My own fault. I just couldn't get to the Christmas 2025 graduation, but I was very happy to graduate last June instead. And in the journey of a doctorate, the timing of graduation, as some of you will know, is not important. It's just getting there. So I'm so happy to have completed this piece of work. Sorry now, just moving on. So, just for those of you who are not in the Irish context, and for those of you who are, a few facts about primary principalship in Ireland. We have no formal preparation. We can walk into the job once we're teachers for 5 years. And believe it or believe it not, if it's a very small school of under 4 teachers or under, we don't even have to have 5 years experience. And this, as you can imagine, creates problems. We Because we don't have the formal preparation, we have a very extensive induction with mentoring. The induction program is called Mishnach. Mishnach is the Irish word for courage, and it goes over the first 2 years of a principal's new role. And alongside that, they have a one-to-one mentor for their first year, and they have a group mentor in their second year, and they have executive coaching available to them as well. So what we don't do in pre-role, we do post-role. And there is an ongoing debate, folks, as to whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. The whole focus in primary land in Ireland at the moment is the new primary curriculum framework, the PCF. Everybody's talking about it. We also have a strong focus on the development of distributed leadership, which my research found is not really developed yet. And our other key foci include inclusion, children from other countries, special education needs, huge at the moment, and looking after children with a huge variety of need, partnership with everybody, parents, students, children, local community, board of management, we call it in Ireland, or board of governors, as you would know it as, etc., etc. Partnership is huge, and our belief in professional learning is very strong. And what we're sort of combating with at the moment, if you want, is a negativity regarding senior leadership. And people often ask, when they consider principalship, they often hear back, "Are you mad?" And again, my research shows that we need to actually listen to that and change it. And there is a real sense of overwhelm because of diversity in the classroom, because of consistent change, especially around curriculum, and consistent change in legislative areas. So there's where we're at. And just some hard facts for you as well. You can see there, 46 of all the people who become primary leaders do nothing in advance in relation to leadership learning. Only 27 of them have been deputies. 54% have full-time teaching duties. That's 98% of deputies. 54% fall into high or severe burnout. The IPPN is the Irish Primary Principals Network, our professional organisation. This is their research. And 88% of deputies said they would not apply for a principalship if it happened to arise. And when we look at job applications in relation to administrative principals or principals who do not have a teaching role, 27% of the applications have 3 applicants or less, and that rises to 35% for teaching principals. So you can see we're in a little bit of bother. The key documents around this research and this presentation is the Looking at Our School 2022, which is our Bible for the role of the principal, the deputy principal, and the assistant principal, the Wellbeing Policy Framework, which we must adhere to, the aforementioned Primary Curriculum Framework, and a circular letter, which was sent out in 44/2019 and which talks to us around distributed leadership, but didn't really do much to mediate its development in schools. Okay, so let's just stop for a minute and just look at that and consider where we are in Ireland and the issues that we have coming our way. The negativity, the lack of job applications, particularly at senior leadership level, the consistent change legislatively and in curriculum, and the importance now of making sure that this role becomes more attractive for those who are even remotely interested in it. Um, and I was just wondering, do you have any thoughts on that? Is it the same in your contexts? Would you like to take up, close off your microphone and come in for a minute? You're very welcome.
Would you love to wave a magic wand, or something and say, this is wonderful, this is great. I do think the PDSL is making a difference. So this is the postgraduate diploma in school leadership, which is endorsed by IDE, that Anna is running the leadership section of. And so it's subsidized by the Department of Education. It's over 18 months and it's excellent. And I know people who sit on interview boards and interview principals say, you can see someone who has done the PDSL. Now, I suppose it can have the reverse effect. It can, some people put them off and say, no way in the wide world, I'm not going there. But then that's really good that, they've got this understanding what it's all about and that they've made that decision that maybe it's not for them now, but maybe it's another time. So I think, and that we're going into the 10th year of PDSL, and I think that should make a difference. I mean, there is an appetite for people, but then maybe it's more middle management, people going for posts or going for deputy, but the principalship, that's a different story. I know Mary Niall, Anna May's colleague, talks about the, maybe the 7-year term, putting a term on it. And I suppose if someone becomes a principal in Ireland and after so many years, if they want to step down, then they go back to being the most junior person. So I think that might be a way of, if it's kind of a carrot there, do this for so long, but then you can step aside without losing your allowance. Because for lots of people, once they become principal and they've got used to that, and also definitely the allowance, the monetary thing, that even if they wanted to step down, they possibly wouldn't feel they could afford it. So those are just a few ideas there for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dimna. Anybody else want to come in? Or will we move on at this stage and get more into a little bit of what came out in the study? There might be more ground for discussion then. So I'll move on again. Just bear with me for 1 minute. And here we go. So, what possessed me to begin a study? Right. Well, one person actually said this to me one day. I love the job, but it's killing me. And I've had so many iterations of that since. And it made me think, why do people say that? They love the job, but it's killing them. I thought it was just very interesting. I am really into this insider outsider perspective. And you can see there, Milligan talks about it. And it's kind of that state of being neither one or the other, but taking on different positions, basically depending on your situation and the situation of your participants when you're working in research. And I found that very interesting. And Millikan described somebody like me as an in-betweener. So just to explain to those of you who don't know me, I am, obviously I was a teacher and then a middle leader and then a school head or principal for 15 years. And then a system leader. I worked as the deputy director of the Centre for School Leadership from 2015 to 23, and then from 23 to presently as leading up the cross-sectoral leadership section in IDGE. And so because of that, I'm a total in-betweener. I'm in bits of everything. And this was important to me in this research. It was that Thompson and Gunter described it as continuously shifting relationships that are messily blurred. and that described me and described my relationship with my participants. So again, it was a little bit of motivation for me. Um, I am optimistic by nature, so I always search for the benefits among the challenges, and I really feel we have to tackle the prevailing negativity. I am also totally bowled over by the work of Martha Nussbaum, especially in her Upheavals of Thought in 2001, and the development of the person of the principal, as well as their practice. Their practice is essential, but they must also be developed as principals personally. I believe, and always have done, in the power of good quality professional learning. And I believe that the system has a responsibility to support school leaders. And now that I work in the system, I wanted to find some way of doing that better. So those were that all of those things were included in my motivation. The research questions, bringing out the benefits and challenges, becoming a principal. How do benefits and challenges look like in those early years? Professional learning and how it can mediate, and the potential of the system to support people who are becoming principals. I really feel they have a responsibility there. So just looking at what the contextual framework for the study was very briefly, I'm not going to go into detail here. School self-evaluation is very important in Ireland, as is external evaluation. So they're in there. That document I previously referred to, 44, 2019, Leos also referred to. I collected my data way back in May 22, so COVID was a feature, as was the downturn way back in 2008, 9, 10, which affected leadership support in Ireland. And that whole idea of neoliberalism, and are we getting people simply to do extra jobs, or are we developing leadership capacity in the country? Then the conceptual framework behind all of this, the stages of leadership referred to are aspiring, newly appointed, and established. And I suppose what was important to me was the context and culture of the participants' schools, their skills and dispositions, their learning and experience. Obviously, as I already mentioned, the benefits and challenges, the system support, and the person of the leader. And what was I aspiring to? I was aspiring to portraying a much more sustainable leadership in Ireland, school improvement, because we have to have it. We have an external evaluation system that we must deal with. That whole idea of effective leadership from a social justice point of view, role attractiveness, so important against the prevailing negativity. System collaboration, people in the system working together to help school leaders as against in silos. And of course, as I mentioned already, professional learning. And then some of the leadership types or approaches that come up during the study or throughout the study are this distributed leadership, which I feel is still not properly there. I am delighted that Ines is here because transformational leadership, of which she is an expert and is quoted throughout the work, is important but challenging for newly appointed school leaders. Collaborative, I've already mentioned, that system leadership, authentic leadership, a paper, and Dipna actually was one of the writers of it by Lynch et al. Recently, talked about being yourself as a leader. And I gained great inspiration from that. And of course, the sustainable piece. And most of you already, this was an empirical study situated in an interpretivist paradigm. I won't get into any of that with you today. That's not what today is about. But you can see there that it was relativist in the sense that I really wanted the realness of the joy and the benefits of the role to be portrayed. And it was subjectivist. I wanted it through the experience of my participants. And obviously 15 semi-structured interviews and thematic analysis. So we won't go into any more detail there. But I do want to draw your attention to this diagram developed by the Centre for School Leadership in 2018 that looks at 6 separate stages of leadership as against levels. And one of the things that came out of the study was how important these stages are, their own integrity. It's quite acceptable for somebody to be a teacher or middle leader without becoming a principal or a deputy or a system leader. And the recognition of that is important throughout this study. Okay, is everybody all right there? Is there too much information? Are you all okay? Are you all bombarded and saying, what? Everybody okay? Good.
I'm looking at who's in the room, Anime, and I know that nobody is bombazled by that at all. I think you're absolutely in your comfort zone with who's in the room and that explanation. It's great. Orla's managed to turn her camera on now too. Does that mean you're stopped for a minute, Orla? And you
Yeah,
can contribute
yeah, I got a safe place to stop. Thanks, Deb.
You're so good to be here after your day. So I really appreciate it. Okay, we'll keep going and we'll stop for a discussion after this next bit, so that we're not delaying anybody. Just give me one. Okay, so let's look at the case of the newly appointed principal straight from the study. And some of this I just found very, very interesting. You might say, do we know this already? Yes, we do. Did we consider it already? Maybe not so much so. But the whole idea of somebody who's destined to become a principal but never articulates a desire to do so and definitely didn't form a career plan to achieve it. So, somebody who seems to have the skills, the dispositions, not so much the experience, but may have experience outside of education. Um, but these are the people who are becoming principals. So, they never said, oh, yes, I'd very much like to become one. And yet they seemed to be in the right place at the right time to achieve it. And you can see some of the quotes from my participants there. Katie was saying they're throwing into this school environment with no knowledge of the diversity of personalities they're going to be dealing with. And they're blind to the true meaning of what the role is. And this is something we don't consider very often. We all work in schools, or used at least to work in schools with teachers and with a principal, and at second level more than one deputy principal. And yet the teachers, if you ask them, they would be familiar with the role of principal. You would imagine that they mightn't balk at stepping into it for a day or two or a week, perhaps no longer. But you would be very surprised when you hear that they eventually maybe had the opportunity to step in and were absolutely shocked by what they needed to achieve in the role. And this is a bit worrying for me. Um, Lots of established leaders will say we're very concerned for our newly appointed colleagues. How can we help them? And McGovern, that's Aideen, my colleague, she's a director of an education centre in Navan. She says that 80% find the role more challenging than expected, which backs up what I say, and that really bespoke support is needed to enjoy the benefits and address the challenges. So I'm just going to move on to this bit because it's all together in this bit. So why did they go for it? Well, they had a very strong self-belief. They believed they had the skills, they believed they'd be effective. And look at them. One third of them were leaders, had leadership roles in their local community. Now, not in education, but other leadership roles. And three of them, it was in the genes, as Katie said. They had people relations before them who were all in leadership in education. And this is an interesting one. They got encouragement from those around them. Okay, that sounds like a positive. Um, they said it was both from family, yes, you'd be good at that, and from colleagues, go for it. That would be wonderful. Now, the colleague encouragement was a little bit questionable, as in, well, if you go for it, it might avoid him getting it. If you go for it, it might avoid somebody coming in from the outside that we don't know. So that's all kind of a questionable sort of encouragement. A willingness to engage in professional learning, they were all interested in it. They had a passion for a particular aspect of leading. It could have been special education needs. It could have been building projects. It could have been looking after children from other countries. Anything, one particular thing, they said, if I became principal, I could really do something for that cohort of students. And interestingly, the influence of former principals was quite strong. Now, MacBeat said way back in 2009 that if you take over from an ineffective principal, you have a longer honeymoon period. But some of them said taking over from an ineffective principal is not good because the narrative is negative in the school. And the majority said taking over from a highly competent, confident, well-liked principal was also very challenging. And the second step was that some of them learned from the ineffective principals and decided to do it a totally different way themselves. And others said, well, this worked well for the person in the past, and I'm going to continue on his or her legacy. But I thought that bit was interesting. And just beginning the findings and I'll just stop after this. 12 out of 15 of them said that I took on the position because it became available. Just because it became available. And look at their age profile. 9 in their 20s, 5 in their 30s, and one lady in her 50s who took over from a seconded principal, somebody who was going out to work in the system. 8 of them had absolutely no former leadership experience. 4 were deputies, 3 were assistant principals. And when they were going for the role, they did not internalize the negativity. This was Macbeth was talking about this. They wanted to influence the lives of children. So all the other issues that school principals talk about, I'm going to leave that aside. I have this, I can do it. Or as Katie said, I can do it until I found I couldn't do it. So 4 wanted to move home. So they went for principalship where their location they wanted to move to was. 4 happened to be in their schools when the principal either retired or left. 4 were encouraged to do so by people around them, and 2 were unhappy with former principals and decided that they could make a better job of it themselves, and so they went on to try it. Now, just until I see, we might just take these next 2 and then we'll stop. So, professional learning needs, what are they? Dimna spoke about the PDSL, which is a wonderful programme run by the University of Limerick, the University of Galway and UCD in Dublin. And she said it's a really good programme, but it needs to do even more in taking the theory out and putting it into practice. And all of the participants said, people need to shadow us as principals to understand the nitty-gritty before they take over the role themselves. And Andrew said they must do some form of apprenticeship, as in be a deputy principal or an assistant principal before they take on a role. But interestingly, considering the debate in Ireland, even after a preparation programme, Early and Bob said bespoke support is needed because this is a major transition for people. And my study comes to the conclusion that the Irish system isn't currently providing enough, and it's certainly not providing enough in the affective domain. Cora described herself as being completely at zero for emotional development of a principal when she began. And Lee Pickett, way back in 2019, said that emotional experiences are critical to leadership effectiveness. So this is important, but most people are not where they should be. And after this, we'll stop. So these newly appointed people, what do they struggle with? They struggle with all of those types of leadership when they begin. They do not always become a principal for the right reasons, according to Molly from my study. The nature of encouragement from others needs to be questioned, as I already explained. There is no leadership program. They often don't have leadership experience, and they never get a formal handover. And look at the number of schools in Ireland, with 44% defined as small, meaning 4 or fewer mainstream teachers. So now you can see why there is a crisis, if you want to call it that, emerging in leadership in Ireland. Okay, time to stop and give you a break. What do you think?
Yes, can I ask a couple of questions, really?
Of course.
The first thing I'd like to ask is what you are talking about around distributive leadership, because when I did my PhD, I used distributive leadership by Spillan, and I found that I couldn't use it that well. I need to remember that it's hybrid. One school will use distributive leadership on one level, another on another, and so on and so forth. So the first question really, I think that I ask is, I mean, I've used distributive leadership both in my thesis and some papers and a book that I recently did on with my partner on teaching assistants and their voice, and the way that leaders would deal with that. So the first thing I'd like to ask, how are you using distributive leadership?
So, first of all, you mentioned Spillane. Thank you, Stephen. First of all, you mentioned Spillane. So throughout,
Yeah,
it's his work that's quoted, and that of Alma Harris as well. And it's that
yeah,
critical piece, Stephen. Distributed leadership is looked upon as a positive, but when you look at the huge amount of writing that has been done on distributed leadership, you find that critically it is also has the potential to be a complete disaster if used in
yeah,
the wrong hands through the wrong kind of leadership.
yeah,
So, in answer to your question, I hope I presented critically in that way, but practically in schools, it's all about the leadership culture in that school and the approaches to leadership by the senior leaders. And they have a critical, it was hugely important part to play in how leadership is distributed, shared with other people on either their senior leadership team or their middle leadership team, or indeed throughout the
yeah,
school with their teachers. And you've hit on something very important there. This is often why it has not been successful in Ireland, because it has not been properly facilitated or mediated either by
yeah,
the Department of Education to schools, Stephen, as a first off, or within schools by principals and middle leaders. And very often we find when we speak to principals, they will complain about their middle leadership teams. And when we speak to middle leaders, they will complain about their senior leadership teams. And so therefore it goes back and forth like that. And the only thing that worked in our context was a pilot that we were allowed to do just before the pandemic on principals, deputies, and middle leaders coming together to learn about distributed leadership together. So the whole school was in the room learning about distributed leadership, as against just one group of that leadership team that was going back to bring a message back. So we haven't been enabled financially to continue that, and that's a pity, but it needs to be the way distributed leadership goes in the
yeah,
future. You need
yeah.
all the people together, learning together, in mind.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I've actually made it very, very clear in the papers, and I would take the same view. The other point that I'd just ask, and this is because you've mentioned special educational needs. As you know, the so-called white paper is supposed to come out, or supposed to come out in last year. Still not happened. I'm actually doing some work, and discussing this with Rob Webster and Chris Brown. Now, the thing is, I'm wondering if you are a young or a new leader, and particularly principal, must be very difficult to know where you're going to go with special educational needs and disabilities. Are you finding that?
We're finding that all the time in Ireland. We have consistent debates going on, Stephen. At one stage, we were following a New Brunswick model where future of
Yeah.
special schools in Ireland seemed to be closure. That has now changed. There was a real rise against that, and we're now moving towards total integration in schools to the
Yes.
best of the ability of the individual schools. Autism classes have mushroomed everywhere. But the
Mm.
feedback from principals is that while that is wonderful and it's really helping our children with autism, there are so many other needs that are not being dealt with in schools.
Of
And
course.
the because of the focus on autism, and it's very important to me. I have a granddaughter with autism. Because of that focus, right? The other needs of children who have different needs are not being met to the same extent as they were in the past. And schools that are looking for, we'll say, special classes for children apart from those with autism are not succeeding in getting them. The distribution model of support is hugely contentious in Ireland, Stephen.
Yeah, it
Hugely.
is here as well. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's now at the discretion of the principal. In the past, we were told you have 300 children in your school, you have this, that, and the other. This is what you're getting. Now,
Mm.
uh, um, we get a certain amount of support, but the principal with the leadership team decides how that's distributed within the school, and that is very hard, particularly for newly appointed colleagues, because parents of children with special needs, and rightly so, are very passionate about their children's needs
Yes.
and
Yeah.
consistently approach them to get more support for their particular child. So we're having quite a difficult time in Ireland around special education needs. And I'm wondering if anybody else would like to come in.
Thanks, Edison.
Everybody else, all right.
Yeah, it's mad. It really is. And it's like it's another job, you know, looking after special ed, and in particular where you have schools with lots of autism classes. Yeah, it's huge. And I suppose maybe something like, you know, a deputy, a walking deputy, or someone, you know, who would have responsibility for it. And just going back, Anna May, there to your other findings, I think, you know, the apprenticeship model, I think that would be just fantastic, wouldn't it? Like we look at our transition year students, you know, who are about 15, 16, and they get to go into the workplace, and they, you know, they do a week or two or whatever. And gosh, wouldn't it be a wonderful way of, so someone, you know, they have been appointed and that they can then shadow, you know, that handover period, and not, you know, people talk about being handed the keys of the school and the keys of the filing cabinet and the roll book or the chloral hour or whatever, you know. So, I mean, all of that would really help, and it would just make that job so much easier and more attractive for whoever comes up with it. I'm talking too much now, I'll stop.
You're fine. You're very welcome, Divna. And thank you for coming in. Mary, did you want to come in? Bit of a trouble with sound, do you, Mary?
No, I couldn't find the mouse wasn't cooperating to take myself off mute. No, but I agree, Divna, completely. I mean, I think an apprenticeship model would be absolutely fantastic, because I think the thing about it is that each person's understanding of leadership itself is different. And I think context makes such a difference. So if you have somebody coming from who has worked within that particular school and is an insider getting the job, there's challenges and opportunities in that, but I suppose in some ways they're at more of an advantage because they understand their context, their community expectations, and their staff as well, and where the strengths in their staff lie, and maybe potentially how they can tap into that. But I suppose in a lot of cases, people are coming from a different sector, so they might be moving because my knowledge, if you like, would be of post-primary a lot more than primary. And a post-primary level, you could be coming from a community school into voluntary secondary, or from, and educate together into voluntary secondary, or vice versa, and whatever. And each one of those sectors have their own ethos, and therefore their understanding of leadership and what leadership looks like as well can be different. So somebody coming in from outside and moving sectors, there's a lot needed in that for them to just get to grips with the kind of place they are, the staff, and all of the expectations of parents and everything else. So, teaching is one job, but the bottom line is principalship is something very different. And you need to certainly be a teacher to understand the school, and you need to be a teacher to be a principal. But when you go into that job of principalship, it's so different to anything that you've experienced before. And then I think if you move contexts, it can be so much more challenging as well. So certainly an apprenticeship model, if you had time to spend with the old principal and work with them, and obviously your ideas and everything else are going to be different, but you still get a much deeper understanding of the school and your students and your staff and your parents, your community, your board, and so on. And I think it would be wonderful if only the department would agree to doing something like that. Would be great.
We can only aspire. We can
We
only
can
aspire.
only aspire, yes, indeed. If we don't have ideals to aspire to, then
Did you
sometimes make
you want
things.
to explore for a minute what the barriers are? So, if you, as an experienced system leader, Anna May and Mary, the position that you come at from that perspective yourself, with the post-primary perspective, if you're saying to your government, actually, this is the preferred route, what are the barriers to that? Is it just expense because we're taking somebody out of a classroom, so effectively we've got both sets of costs, salary costs of a principal? Is it that?
Well, sorry, Anna May would be in a much better position to actually answer that question. But certainly, my perception working with principals is that that is the major challenge, the financial issue. Because, if you take it to deputy principalship, you have to have, Anna May would probably correct me here, I think it's 500 students, you have one principal, one deputy. But if you have 750, you're allowed a second one. So that would, if you, even if you could take those numbers down so that you could have more deputy principals, that might be some support to a principal. But and again, that to me is ordained by finance as to how many deputies you have. So I think there's an interesting pilot study being done in Australia of having two principals in a role in the school. And I'm really interested to see what the results of that is. Now, it seems to be built more on a job share model, which again, you would have to have two people who are very similar. So that's potentially that's one salary.
Mm,
I think
mm.
having an apprenticeship model, you see, would be two salaries for one role. And I'm assuming that that's a prohibitive factor. But as I said, Anna May could speak to that piece better than me.
Well, look,
May I
expense is
come in?
always, of course, please come in, come in, come in.
Sorry, Anna May, yeah, and again, you'd know this, but I think one of the problematic aspects of it is that most of the positions are filled during the summer. And so new principals are appointed generally coming towards the summer, then they have the summer to get used to it. And that's where the apprenticeship would create difficulties. I'm not saying I approve of it. I think the apprenticeship would be a fabulous model. But if you have a principal maybe who has been employed or appointed to another school, is leaving maybe their smaller school, which happens quite frequently in Ireland in particular, a teaching principal moves to an administrative principal point of view. If they're to take up their position in the new school for the new school year, it's virtually impossible to have that principal as an apprentice to the new principal in the original school. So I know that's definitely one of it. It's just one of the huge barriers. When you ask Deb, what are the barriers to that apprenticeship system? That's one of the biggest, the logistical cultural aspect of the fact that principalships and principal appointments in Ireland tend to work on starting a new position in the new school year.
So that's really interesting because actually, as we know, everything's usually more complex, more multifaceted, and often has a large dimension associated with finance, right? So we can see that, and that's the same in all systems, wherever we're looking at it. But one of the things in our very different English context that we perhaps now say is more of an advantage, even those of us who perhaps weren't a big fan of multi-academy trusts, what multi-academy trusts have done is recreated their central teams, and in allowing for those central teams, when they take somebody out of headship into their central team, they're of course still employing them and they're still running the costs of employing them. So that person is still there. So what we're finding is that now in some trusts, clearly all trusts are different and one trust is different to the next, but there is some examples now where headships are principals often now labelled heads of school, quite different to the head teacher, the principal role, but they are being given some more handover because those people are still staying in post within a group of schools. So, I mean, there are lots of other things that we could talk about that, but I'm interested in what kind of the, I guess, ideal scenario, Anna May, is from your research.
Well, the ideal scenario for me is actually Ina's completely nailed it there. It would be that principals have to retire early in a school year to leave time for this apprenticeship model to happen. So they would need, currently, if I was a principal back in my school, I would not have to give notice of my retirement until the 31st of May, which is 3 months in advance of the 31st of August, which is when I would be officially retiring. So I would need to, I think, all principalships should be recruited somewhere between Easter and summer. And then on top of that, the person coming in needs to be substituted out of their classroom in that school or in a different school to come and do the apprenticeship piece. Now, the unions would not, I wrote it in my thesis, but I'm used to putting my neck in the line. So people are used to me in that sense. But the unions would not be, I guess, probably, and I work very closely with our primary union, the INTO, who are very, very supportive of leadership. But they would feel also that a principal can retire whenever they feel like retiring, as in at the end of September, Christmas, midterm, or whenever. So therefore, if were to put something like this down, you're taking away that right from them. But I'm thinking that the handover and the needs of the person coming along behind them are more important than their actual time of retiring when they're retiring anyway, if you know what I mean. And even with that, there would always be unexpected retirements, people, leaving principalship for short periods of time and coming back again, all of that. So that's all of the messiness of it. But if there was a general rule that this shadowing would take between Easter and summer, and that the person taking over would get at least 1 or 2 days substituted so they could leave their class behind if they're in a classroom situation, then that would be my answer to it. But as I said already, we can only ask.
Yeah, but I
So
think it's an interesting ask, because I think we talked right at the start, you talked to us right at the start about the amount of flexibility in the system and the recruitment and the retention issues and people not wanting to step into the pipeline. And actually, I think, again, in my English context, one of the things that's happened is that we perhaps now have more flex around that sort of substitution, particularly for at least a couple of days. I think heads of school, principals get that easily now in an English context, because they are much more likely now, because of that recruitment and retention issue, to start after Christmas or to start after Easter. And actually, that holy grail of new school September start is much, much, much more mixed over here than it has ever been before, in part, of course, because of all of those drivers of the system that we've talked about. It's absolutely fascinating.
really is. It's like it's gas, really. But there we have it. So, bringing the plane into land and coming towards the end of this, as somebody said on a Zoom once, and I really liked it because it sounded like we were coming towards the end. And it's always good when you're coming towards the end, especially at this time of the evening after a day's work. But just to share with you, like the actual findings of this piece of work. So first of all, I discovered that when benefits are discussed in leadership in the literature, they're only discussed in relation to student learning, school improvement, and policy enactment. They are never discussed in relation to anything else, particularly not the personal development of the leader. But the benefits of the role are literally not there anywhere. It's all about, benefits to students, school improvement, and policy enactment. As I said already, and thank you, Stephen, for your contribution to this, distributed leadership is not understood in Irish schools. And, developmental supports really were never put in there to support that enactment. Um, the situational circumstances of becoming a leader are completely absent in the literature. It's almost like, well, these are people highly interested in leadership applying for the job. And I found that wasn't the case at all. And that there was a real lack of knowledge. As Brendan in the study said, it's naivety. And Andrew said it's rose tinted glasses. And it is, I can do that job. My principal does it well. Why can't I? That kind of thinking. And then this shadowing and handover instead of formal prep, really necessary for the future. Mentoring and coaching would really help all of this. And leadership learning needs to be reviewed with more learner-driven opportunities through those kind, I won't list them there, those types of learning situations. We need to consider the integrity of each stage of leadership, as I discussed earlier. We need to really focus on the development of our middle leaders, either to support them to stay in middle leadership until their retirement or to move towards senior leadership if they so desire. But both sets of people need to be equally supported. And this one, and it's one that, we often forget about, the influence of the more established principles. And that sentence I heard when the person asked or said, I'm interested in becoming a principal, the retort was, are you mad? And I just think those of us who have been around a while have a real responsibility there. So they were just finishing off with recommendations, and they fell into three categories. The first category was the recommendations for professional learning. And as I said at the beginning of this presentation, we're really busy in Ireland at the moment with the PCF, with child protection, with anti-bullying, and all of that is important and essential. But when we spend our time providing professional learning for principals in all of those areas, as we must, we need to provide time and space for them to chat, to talk, to consider the challenges, to understand benefits, and to focus on their own values and beliefs aligning with those of their school. Back to that idea of Dimpness paper and the authentic leadership, the importance of I am who I am. So I am a mother of 3 young children. I will be leaving every day. I am a professional runner. I go running at 4 o'clock every day. I am an early morning person. I will be in at 6 and gone home at 3. I am an evening person. Stand in front of your staff, state who you are and what's important to you. Okay. The shadowing and formal handover, absolutely essential. Dimna, in the beginning of this, mentioned step-down options, and we don't have a step-down facility. In Ireland, if you step down as principal, if you decide to make that move, you can only do so if there is a position available in your school. And then when you do, you go back to the terms and conditions of the most junior member of staff, which is soul destroying after putting so much work in and, working over a period of time in a long career. So that needs to be looked at, and a 7 or 10 or 15-year limit needs to be put on principals as an option, not as a limitation. And in Australia, they actually take 20% off your salary for a number of years to enable you to go on sabbatical. Again, opt in, opt out. It's very interesting. Short term things. One of our giving out sessions consistently in Ireland is around not being able to focus on teaching and learning and assessment and being worrying about the hole in the roof and the development of the football field. And this goes on all the time. But if we had the opportunity as principals to step down from the role for very short periods of time during the year, even a month, 2 months, let our deputy principal take over, become more engrossed in teaching and learning, that would really help all of the issues that we have. They would get the practice. They would understand what it's like to be in the role. You would be on hand if needed, but otherwise you're off engrossed in the teaching and learning around the classrooms. I'd really love to see some model like that happening. And then there needs to be better opportunities for people like me. I've had wonderful opportunities in the system. Not many people can say they do. Secondment is limited. Our colleague Ciara O'Donnell speaks about it a lot, where after 5 years you must return to school. Again, that all needs to be looked at, and how people can develop in the system and become system leaders. So those are the recommendations for professional learning. The recommendations for the system, I mean, this came out in 2024, and I said we need an education convention, and lo and behold, we have an education convention happening now. So that's wonderful, and it's been chaired by Professor Anne Looney in DCU, and we're really looking forward to that and hope it'll make a difference. We also want the system to calm down. There is the Pew Capacity Planning Framework from the IPPN there, and it basically looks at what you're doing in your school, piloting stuff, implementing it, embedding it, and waiting. And the confidence, especially the newly appointed people need to say, no, this is enough. This is where we're stopping. This is our plan. We are moving forward. We're moving at a pace that suits the children in this school and the teachers. And I am willing to stand over that plan, no matter what is expected from me from external asks. Um, we really need a closer connect between policymakers, the inspectorate, our third level colleagues, and us. We just don't have that. I was involved in a European project. I did not have a system where I could sit with policymakers in Ireland and have a discussion. I could not set that up for my colleagues in Europe. They all had that mechanism in their countries. There's learning there. We need to be talking more, and we need to consider partnerships, especially with parents. There's a wonderful initiative in Ireland called Partnership Schools Ireland. That should be looked at and really, supported. And finally, folks, recommendations for principals. So they continue to need the opportunity to share, but also to celebrate. Mehel, it's an Irish word for a community coming to work together. And we have a program that allows groups of 5 or 6 principals to talk together. It works very well, but it's only serving a small few. The idea here is celebrate as well as share the challenges. It's really important. Otherwise, it's a whinge fest, which we're trying to avoid. The CUSON framework for professional learning, it sort of champions professional learning in schools and what teachers should do to partake in professional learning. It's worth looking at. Having a digital portfolio of leadership learning when you're a teacher, including in it your learning, as you go through different programs and courses. And if you're interested in senior leadership, developing your leadership learning to have something to produce or to share or to show at interview level would really, I suppose, inspire people to continue their professional learning and to keep going in their learning right through their teaching and leadership career. Distributed leadership still needs more work through coaching, mentoring, communities of practice, national projects like I mentioned. We need to understand and manage our emotions. Nosbum, she says to us that we as principals are vulnerable to events we cannot control. And because of that, our agency as principals is compromised by our emotions, because our emotions come from our beliefs and values. And there I'm going right back to that idea. Align your beliefs and values with those of your school. Emotions are eudaimonistic. They are connected to our flourishing. They're value-laden ways of understanding the world. So developing our emotions, being able to express them to our staff. I'm not in a great place today. I'm quite angry because, I'm thrilled because this is so important to us, because otherwise we suppress them. And all the literature will tell you that suppression of emotions is not good. And finally, folks, changing the narrative of negativity. We've got a responsibility there, all of us on here this evening, everybody. And just to align it with just very recent research. Jerry Jeffers in Maynooth University has written on the deputy principals with his colleagues, and he talks about role tensions and frustration, multiplicity of tasks, while many express high levels of satisfaction in their role. So taking you right back to the beginning again. I love the job, but it's killing me. It's still there in the literature in 2024. And also Barry Morrissey, who has done a load of work on middle leadership. the enabling role of formal senior leaders, exactly what Stephen was talking about, in nurturing the leadership potential of those outside of the management hierarchy, as in the teachers in the school and the middle leaders who are just one step down from the senior leadership, and their influence on curriculum enactment and their mediational role, which is very strong and can never be underestimated. So I started my piece of work with that quote at the top, and I think you'll all understand why. And it wouldn't be right to finish without sharing one Irish saying with you, and you can see what it is there, ar scach chéile vor nadini, and it means in the shelter of each other the people live, or we live in each other's shadows. And that is literally about interdependence, mutual support, community, um, human, I suppose, survival and well-being, all based on caring. And that is really the message of this. Whatever we do, we must do together. And obviously there's references there as well. So I'll stop sharing. Sorry, give me a second. And hope you're all okay and not tired listening as we reach 17:03.
I'm sure people want to say that that was a really fabulous presentation, Anna May. Thank you so much. We're not precious about things finishing on 5 at Belmas, so if anybody wants to make a comment, please do. But I love that.
Yes, can I just say that I thought that the presentation was really good, and I do feel that the situation with principals when they have first come in, I lived through this a long time in Hackney with a number of different principals. I think it's really quite important to understand that there needs to be some support before they even go there, because it seems to me that to turn up there and then you'll get help once you're there, you've got to have some background to understand how to do it in the first place, I think.
Completely agree, Stephen. Absolutely, completely agree. It's just not to be walked into. We have this syndrome here, teacher today, principal's office Monday, doesn't work. There has to be more than that, even for the highly capable and competent.
Thank you.
I love your positivity, Anna May. You're so positive and so motivating, and it's lovely. Well done.
Yeah. Thank you. Much appreciated. And I just want to say, oh, sorry, Patricia, did you want to come?
I'm really late coming in, and I'm so sorry. I'm juggling 2 jobs at the moment, so I'm really sorry that I was so late. But what I did get to hear was powerful, and I found it very useful. I've taken loads of notes, just to say that. But I also wanted to add another piece, Anna May, that I find really interesting, which is about, when we jump in at the deep end, which we're doing really with school leaders, there's cultural implications of that. And you can easily tread on a landmine or make a mistake or try find your way. And there's a longevity in the culture to try and repair and figure out how to redress. And we can save our leaders from all of that stress if we sort of took your advice and thought about, it's not just about well-being for the person who's coming into that role, but it's the cultural implications and the dynamics that we're then trying to redress and figure out and repair if we inadvertently stand on pieces that we shouldn't. So systemically for the organization, it's also very valuable to look at it from the way that you're looking at it. So I just wanted to add that piece in. I think it's really powerful for what you're doing.
Much appreciated. Thanks a million. And Deb, I'd like to thank you and Cynthia and Kelly as well for all your help and support in the lead up to this. Much appreciated. You're always so good as a team, and I really appreciate it.
It was lovely to hear that Irish perspective today, Anna May. Thank you. We should do some more from over that Irish Sea. It's very important that we get this range of diverse voices join us. So that's great. And Cynthia's here now to say a quick hello, aren't you, Cynthia?
Made it just at the end. Thank you.
But really terrific session this afternoon, Anna May. It's given us loads to go away and think about. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you all. Thanks for coming.